You're listening to Late Night Tales.
I'm just wondering what you guys think about the recent release of the U2 album, given the fact that that has generated possibly quite a lot of negative publicity, and I'm wondering whether it is true that there's no such thing as bad publicity in the light of the U2 album. Robin?
I think when we're talking about publicity in the age of when we're talking about publicity in the physical press, there's only a certain amount of outlets. So if you manage to get those people talking, then that is invariably a good thing. I think if you've been trending on Twitter all day and there's not a single good thing to say about it, then that's invariably probably a bad thing. One of the ideas behind U2 doing that apparently was to rejuvenate their back catalogue, which sits on iTunes and it will remain forevermore, and it's to rejuvenate those sales. It's a long tail argument. But what they found was, I think about 84 people went and bought the Joshua Tree, and that was it. So it didn't really work, I think, in that sense. Has anyone not heard of U2? I don't know. Does anyone not know who Bono is? I don't know. Do they need press?
Is that rhetorical? Ansel?
I think the irony of the new U2 album is that it probably sounds like the last 5 U2 albums. And the other thing is that my introduction to it was not through the U2 brand, it's through the Apple brand. And when I saw it, I saw Apple before I even saw U2, and for a brand with supposedly such a strong lineage, it seems to me somewhat disappointing that my introduction to them is via a commercial venture that sits aside from theirs, but ultimately they're co-signing themselves via. And yeah, it feels to me a little bit uncomfortable. And like you said, is there any such thing as bad press? Clearly not when you're Bono, and he seems to not really have an issue with that. But for me, does that mean that I respect them and respect where they're going and respect the musical integrity of what they're doing? And obviously everybody has to make a living, but I think they've kind of done that. And I just don't see U2 anymore. I see, in these instances, association with tech conglomerate, full stop.
Robert, I'm sure you're very interested in U2's fortunes.
I'm getting ready for this. No, I don't know. I guess everything that was worth saying to this topic probably has been said. And I might like to add that actually I strongly agree with that point that I think art is dead in that moment where the artist doesn't even show any connection anymore. It's just it's beyond just a product. It's just literally, it's an endorsed sort of force-fed thing that is really alienating, because in the end, the artist was meant to be someone who actually appreciates an audience and appreciates a certain, a communication and something that goes both ways and not just sort of dropping some. It's like spam, but it's I don't know.
Irish spam. Okay, I'm going to ask one more question and then we'll open it out to the floor, see if anybody wants to ask any questions to our esteemed panel. What do you think of the idea of the Tastemaker, which is obviously what a series like Late Night Tales are predicated on, which is choosing particular people to choose types of music? I'm wondering if there are any tastemakers that have been crucial in your life growing up and how you've discovered music, whether it's a radio DJ or your father or your mother or a sister or a brother or a mate at school. And are there any tastemakers that have made a difference in your life for music? Ansel?
The misnomer of the tastemaker. I invariably see that very few tastemakers ever call themselves tastemakers. And the people who have been most influential in my life, I don't have more than one life. In my life, have generally just been really passionate about music and culture. And what I've bought into, as much as anything else, was their passion about music and culture. My uncle, growing up in Gloucester, he was like a mini celebrity with his band at the time, but it was how he made culture seem like such a dynamic thing to me that made me just want to love music as much as he loved music. And it wasn't even about the songs at the time, it was just about what joy came from engaging with a piece of music. For me, it was listening to him replay the riffs of Pink Panther while it was on television, which made me think I could become a guitarist. Didn't happen, but it was a nice idea. But it was about the obsession with somebody else's obsession, which for me was so genuine, and it wasn't about a sales pitch. So you can present yourself as a tastemaker in the common mediated sense, because most of us invariably have little idea of what that actually means. So I see queues of people at events who in themselves are considered tastemakers because somebody's told them they're a tastemaker, which made them feel good about the idea of being a tastemaker. And it's just an interesting knock-on effect of a quite subservient culture, which gives us the idea that we are in ourselves responsible for every single choice that we make, when in a time when marketing and marketing strategies and processes are so sophisticated so as to have us believe that the decisions that we make are all our own and never somebody else's. I think tastemakers generally are people that are willing to put themselves in the line, look like an idiot, and die for what they do. And they never call themselves a tastemaker.
Blessed are the tastemakers. Robin.
Yeah, I completely agree with Ansel. I think it's that role of the trusted voice, which has always been there. If you look at the older analog system, growing up in the middle of nowhere, John Peel was always a big favourite. Things like the Late Junction were always a big favourite. Things like the NME, when it was the New Musical Express, was a big favourite. And now we've got this sped up digital system. There's a lot more tastemakers, so-called, and a lot more people exist out with mainstream media and are able to hold an influence. So yeah, it is that role as a trusted voice. It's what you return to amidst the noise of the digital age, is the pitchforks, it's the facts, it's the Clash, it's Dummy, it's all these different people, and radio presenters as well. And like you say, it's the sincerity of the approach that really comes through, and it's the ability to link it to something that's broader than just... When you boil it down, an MP3 is just a series of dots and dashes that's been engraved upon this little microchip somewhere, and now it sits as information upon your computer. It is a nothing, it's entirely ethereal. The ability to make that into something that can shift your life in some tiny and proportionate way, but nonetheless in some manners, is a really incredible thing.
Robert?
Yeah, I definitely agree that tastemaker, it sort of implies that people don't have very good taste and you can improve the taste. And I guess I really started realizing what a tastemaker is, because in the beginning it was really strange to me. Like, managers would email and say, have you sent out the promo to the tastemakers? And I would go like, who are these kind of guys, you know? And I literally asked people, like, who are tastemakers at the BBC, you know? Who's a tastemaker in London? And I think on that, or maybe later, I kind of realized that there's equally as many bad tastemakers as good tastemakers. And it's all like, I don't know, it's one of those things where I'm quite grateful that my roots are more in architecture, where things are very logical and very like, I don't know, it's the bigger picture. You don't really think about, you know, you don't argue about the design so much. It's like, because I think actually next to form and function within the arts, time is also a crucial thing. And I have utter respect for someone like John Peel, who makes music timeless again, who can mix like a track from the 50s with a track from the 90s. You listen to like Fugazi rocking out, and then straight after like maybe Milt Jackson just on the vibraphone. And it creates this kind of beautiful contrast where like the punk, or you know, rocker and the classical jazz fan meet, you know, and they both listen out and they both go like, wow, that was an interesting moment. You know, so.
I'm wondering, you grew up in Germany, didn't you, Robert? I'm wondering what it was like musically where you grew up, and you know, what the musical situation was like that. Were there any tastemakers? Was there a German equivalent of John Peel, for example? Or?
Ooh. At my time, there wasn't really such a thing. Like, I think it was a very disgusting blender of public radio, underground electronic music from a record shop that my mum didn't even know I would go to, mixed in with some records that my dad have lying around, and my sister would sort of play some Lenny Kravitz or something. You know, it's like, or the Cranberries. You know, and I would take her to the
I think we should remember David Hasselhoff as well in this.
Yeah.
Of a crucial importance in the breakdown of the wall.
It's an interesting thing, because now that I'm in the industry and I look at it, it really is true that, like, things in Germany are a little bit behind when it comes to popular music. Whereas at the same time they invented a lot of music, but they're not really proud of it. It's just, you know, like Stockhausen, for instance, like, he's buried in a grave in a little town, and now finally they're realizing he has some books written about him, so we're going to write his name on the sort of the signs for the town, but people there still don't really appreciate it. You know, that's not appreciation, it's just tourism, you know, similar to Iceland, where now everyone walks around and goes like, oh, I'm sort of next door from Björk or something like that. And it's one of those things, like, where I'm quite thankful of the environment I grew up in, because it was very, if anything, it was very open-minded and very, like, yeah, there was nobody, like, the English audience, for instance, we spoke about that earlier, is quite interesting because they don't react as enthusiastically live at a gig. Like, they're quite sort of, subtly.
You're not trying to suggest that we're reserved, are you?
I don't think it's reserved, because really there's a lot going on. It's just like, say in America, people would instantly react. They would go like, they have
no self-control, Robert. That's the thing. Yeah.
So I'm kind of, I don't know, like, maybe I shouldn't say anything.
Okay, so at the risk of offending any Americans in the audience, has anybody got any questions they want to ask? I don't know if we've got microphones, but you can shout. Hi, is the lady there, I think? Okay. Ansel, you look like you're ready for that one. Oh, Jesus. He was an exceptional curator. Bad choice of friends. Ansel, sorry.
An exceptional curator for me is somebody that cares about the audience and gives, like I said, an audience credit for its intelligence, and creates a space to enable an audience to discover, be it the art or themselves, through the engagement with what they present to that audience. I think that's what makes an intelligent curator. And because you become somewhat of a psychologist in that sense, by understanding the implications of art, understanding the implications of music, of sound, of noise, and what effect that can have on somebody by presenting it to them in a given time and space. And you might not necessarily, that curator might not necessarily process all of that, but ultimately that's what goes into, I suppose, putting together a body of work or presenting a series of songs for the sake of an album. I look at the likes of Rod Temperton and producers
from
like
Grimsby.
Quincy Jones, exactly, from Grimsby, big up Grimsby. You know, he was a curator. He was a driving force behind Michael Jackson's work, but the voice that never really got celebrated, but was ultimately respected for being part of that mix. But what he was curating there was the response and the kind of takeout and the joy that somebody can gain from engagement with a piece of work and a piece of art, and how a body of 10 songs can go on to create something that was far bigger than the sum of its parts. That to me is curation, and he never called himself a curator. He called himself an artist, probably. And by understanding his art and understanding the implications of his art, that made him an amazing curator. For me, so somebody who understands the implications of creativity, understands the implications of the message, for me, makes somebody worthy of the title.
Robin?
I think the role of the curator is harder than it's ever been, and that's because everyone in this room probably has more information on music than they would have done 10 years ago, than they would have done 20 years ago, than they would have had 30 years ago. It's very easy to be swept up in this information. It's very easy to just be overcome by this playlist shuffle culture. So a good curator for me is someone who makes you look again, at the pathways that underpin this culture, who maybe make you see things that you didn't see before, maybe see connections you didn't see before, or divides that you didn't see before. It's about stopping you in your tracks amidst this information flow and sending you in a slightly different direction than where you were before.
Robert?
Yeah, that, and also I think music or anything that you create is a little bit like a garden. I just want to make sure that people understand I'm not high or anything. but I think it's quite a nice image for it. It's like, because I had to ask myself the question, like, how far do I want to take this thing? Like, how many records can you release within a year, within a month, until it kind of becomes this sort of monoculture within your little world that you've created. And like a garden, I think, is something nice in the way that it's pretty clear that once you decide to get rid of the bits that might not be the most successful, but they're sort of there for a reason, and you're just sort of pumping lots of water and nutrients into, say, carrots, you know, and you only have carrots, and you try and make them bigger and shinier and purer, whatever. Like, as soon as something happens, like some illness or something that just, you know, the garden and that specific carrot can't cope with, you lose everything. And it's one of those things that I truly believe in, that, like, I respect people who kind of, they create a balance around them. And they do introduce new things, but they also don't overly introduce new things until the whole thing just falls over. You know, it's like, it's something that way, you know, you treat it with respect, and you treat it with a sort of common understanding that you don't take it for granted. And it might not last forever. And it might be something that only in that moment is, like, important. And that's enough. Like, it doesn't have to be important for 100 years, you know. It's like, yeah, I think that's...
Thanks. There were some more hands up. The gentleman just there. Yeah, you.
There's loads of different kinds of curators. There's DJs, journalists, websites, and different kinds of magazines and publications. And following on from the last question, I wanted to know who you kind of would define as exceptional curators at the moment, or who your go-to curators, person like each three.
You mean actually naming a person?
Yeah, who your kind of go-to people or your go-to publications.
Okay, that's really putting everyone on the spot, isn't it? But Ansel looks like he's ready for the challenge.
I love
Got
the fact
hold of that
I look
microphone
so ready.
and he's not letting go. Right, Ansel.
I defer these things to my wife because she tells me what to do, and she co-runs Let's Be Brief, so she's a great curator. Spaces that inspire me. Curation spaces. I think there's a space that we go to called Synaptic Stimuli, and I find it a really interesting space because it is an ethereal space, and it's an artistic platform which also is a kind of gateway into politics, into space, into astrophysics, into so many different areas that kind of transcend the content on the website. And for that, I think that in itself is an amazing skill as a curator, to take people in other directions and take them to other spaces. I'll give ourselves a big up, Let's Be Brief, but why not? But it's interesting because people say to us, oh, I come to your site because I read your music reviews, or I come to your site for your advertising. I'm saying, well, we don't really do loads of any one thing, but what people find is if they come there, when they visit that particular section, there's actually time taken to examine that space to such a degree that they feel like, actually, that's what you do. So, but not really. It's just the fact that communication really matters to us, and the relevancy of that piece of music or that piece of communication will mean that we'll take the time and energy to investigate it as thoroughly as possible, rather than to say it's really good, it's really bad, because a lot of us can say that. Qualifying stuff is far more difficult, and not being a twat about it, but ultimately being able to justify your opinion, because doing that is probably far harder than having one in the first instance.
Robert.
Speaking of spaces, I guess it's kind of obvious that we do like live venues, concert halls to inspire you. And within that, there's curators or people who program like a night or series or maybe just a one-off show. But there's so many of them, you know. And to be honest, like it's one of those things. Like I think Cafe Auto, for example, is a good example. It's like a very small place, and if you want to discover music from a very intimate angle, where really like it's naked and you almost feel like you're sitting within the music. It's just an amazing space, you know, and you know, considering my background, I do find it easier to connect with music in a space. I instantly know if I can connect with it or not. If you are in such an environment. Churches are also very similar in a way that they amplify things, but not just the good things, also the very bad things. So I like, you know, St. John's at Hackney, for instance, is a beautiful place. It's a very naked and worn-down church, but it's so, like, true. And, yeah, so I guess, like, that's probably the closest I could get to a curator. Like, on the radio, I personally find it very difficult to find just one person that is sort of like, wow, I listen to that all the time, because, yeah.
Okay. Robin.
For me, I'm very interested in club culture, and I believe a club is simply a space where things happen. I don't think you should enter it with any preconceived notions about what's about to occur. So people who kind of inspire me would be people like Ben UFO or Daniel Avery, who can bring genres together and make you look at it again. Ben UFO's got an amazing grime collection. He's into Metalhead, Zero Blue Note, kind of drum and bass. You can do different things with that. Daniel Avery recently became a curator for Fabric as well, and he's able to push people like the Bleed Night, Avant-Garde Electronics into kind of, something approaching mainstream house to actually just keep people moving and keep that fluidity. And then to pick up on what Ansel says about justifying his opinion, these people are all incredibly erudite, and you can find them on Twitter. They continually espouse what they believe in. They walk it like they talk it. So yeah, I would trust what they have to say.
Can I just
Sure.
chime in just one thing, just in relation to this question? NTS Radio is a brilliantly curated space. Femi Adeyemi, founder, he has one show on that, which he hates talking on, but ultimately, as a curator, he's been able to create an ecosystem that is not only organic, but heartfelt, and one that has given DJs who in themselves curators an opportunity to do what they love without censorship. To be a curator that lets go of the content that goes out the door is a massively brave step, and I think he's taken that step for the love of uncensored, genuine cultural kind of engagement. So Femi and NTS definitely are one that I mentioned, and Chimurenga, which is a Pan-African existential journal, which I would suggest everybody take the time to look at, because that as a piece of printed content is something that feels like more than the paper it's printed on. And we live in that age of disposable news and newspaper, but to print words on a piece of paper that feel like they have permanence, when we live in an age where we associate with that disposable notion of paper on sorry about that, is an achievement. So Chimurenga as a space, not just because of the content, it's the subject matter, and it's the places that the subjects take you and the levels to which they're willing to delve into new areas of thinking, which for me makes it an amazingly well-curated cultural space.
Thanks, Ansel. The gentleman over there. Oh, hi there. Yeah. Sorry, far away.
Just the idea of collecting music in such a wide range and then dishing it out to people with equally a wide range. Do you think there's still a place for local culture or contemporary politics for a songwriter nowadays? Is that valid anymore?
Is what valid, sorry?
Local culture or contemporary politics, things that happen in the art valid if it taken from such a wide area and given out to such a wide area as a curator.
Are you sort of suggesting that the internet has kind of made everything global, or
Well, yeah,
it's
as a curator, if you're taking from such a wide range and then giving it out to such a wide range of people, is localised influences for a songwriter valid or
right?
not?
Robert?
Well, I actually would like to pick up on NTS. Thanks for mentioning NTS. I feel terribly bad for not mentioning them. But it's almost like sometimes it's so obvious and you just don't see it. But I would even go that far to say like NTS Radio is not just a curation, it's also, like you said, it creates an environment, and within that there's room for curators to flourish and grow. And I think it's a very, back to the roots and local establishment that helps its surroundings. Like, I mean, it actually drives people to move to Dalston, just places like NTS, like the Vortex, the Café Auto. And it's amazing to kind of witness that within a time where, like you said, like the internet sort of makes you focus on things that are far away, almost that far that you don't even, you forget about them. And those places like Christina Records, little record shops, Vinyl Pimp, they kind of bring those two worlds together. They're like, okay, Discogs is great for this, like, browsing through millions of records, but then you still want to hear them. You still want to see what kind of condition they are in, or maybe by the time you do actually listen to them, you realize it's not my kind of thing, But on the internet, I find it quite difficult to make that decision. So I think in a way there's at the moment a lot of things happening, sort of bringing that kind of old school vibe back to the people, and they make decisions locally. Where do I want to go? Where do I want to drink my coffee? Do I want to go to Starbucks, or do I want to like support someone who cares about it?
Do you want to go somewhere that pays tax, basically?
Yeah. Or actually, even more charming, someone who doesn't even know how to pay tax. Someone who asks you, "Can you help me with this?" And then you're in the right place.
Robin.
Yeah, I think it definitely does. I think the local has a place and the international has a place as well, and it's about how these things play off against one another. I think if you look at collectives like Lucky Me in Glasgow and the way that Hudson Mohawk would sit up into the early hours of the morning just to speak to a producer who was living on the west coast of Canada, purely so the time zones would interconnect. I think that's an amazing, provocative idea. But equally, if you look at, there's similar producers in Glasgow who didn't bother doing that, who chose simply to walk down Byres Road and speak to the first person they saw. I think there's an incredible power in locality. I think, to repeat what I said earlier, amidst the noise, individual voices resonate that much further, and it's how you get that individuality. You can do it on a local basis. You can look at what's around you, or you can embrace the internet and speak to someone who's in Montreal, like Hudson Mohawk did with Lunis and Form Tonight. You can do things like that. So I think there's room for both systems within the way we're making art these days.
Ansel.
I think there's unbridled potential for artists still to discuss their local environment or their local experiences, but for me the notion of local is somewhat of a misnomer, just like national boundaries in themselves are creations. What we're talking about essentially are common experiences, and artists, take the Specials for instance, they spoke about their immediate environment, but they also spoke about things that mattered to their lives, but those things mattered to many other people's lives. And because they had an attachment with social phenomena, people around the world and around the country were able to connect with that phenomena. And I think what, I suppose, inhibits many artists now from taking on that real kind of investment in, you could call it localism, you can call it an understanding of self or a giving of yourself through a political or social or personal message, and the personal is political, not party political, just to make that distinction, is the fact that you have to then live by those words and actually justify them, and most people don't really want to take the time to then have to justify themselves as anything other than artists who make nice sounds. And I've actually know of many producers who themselves have been shy to include words and lyrics and messages on their music for fear of having to justify the messages thereafter. And I'm like, what the are you talking about? You know, seriously, because life is that critical, and if things matter to you that much, then it will matter to somebody else. And I think it is about taking the step and being brave enough to take that step and to recognize that global is the new local and vice versa, you know, and the idea of psychic distance is what connects people through shared experience and shared values. And by injecting value into what you make and being proud enough to stand behind those values, it means that you're in a better position to kind of reach out and connect with a wider audience. And you're not relying on a tastemaker to tell you that this is of value to you, because it will become apparent.
Okay, we've got time for one more question, so that, and then we're going to play some music. Oh, that lady there.
Do you think you can learn to be a curator, or is it something that is an innate skill?
I think it's bloody mindedness, really. Personally, can you learn to be a curator?
I think so. I think I go to many. You can go to some Tumblr streams and you're looking at curation. You can go to Tumblr streams that show you an insight into somebody's mind. I remember a couple of years ago, there was a Tumblr of a 16-year-old young kid who had a fascination with music and girls, funnily enough. Really kind of novel, that, for a 16-year-old. But what was interesting about the Tumblr was just that it showed me a window into how a 16-year-old thinks in the here and now. Not me as a 16-year-old, which was a few years back, just one or two, but for a 16-year-old in 2013, 2014. Whether he would call himself a curator is another matter, because that name is often that comes with some type of paycheck or government grant or some other bestowing upon you, like it's a crown and scepter. But ultimately, yes, we can all be curators. We are curators. We edit ourselves. To curate is to edit, and to be responsible for what we present. We edit ourselves when we speak. Hence, we are curators, because we're presenting information in some body. So yes.
Robin.
Yeah, I definitely agree. The democratization of the internet means that we are all curators, whether you've got a social media feed, whether you've got a Tumblr, whether you're lucky enough to work in the creative industries. We're all busy curating. I think, yeah, it's just a fact of life. I think the essence is really whether it's good or bad curation. I think whether it's leading somewhere, whether it's leading in the right direction. And yeah, those are many questions.
Robert?
Yeah, as mentioned earlier, I think it's one of those things that's always been there, and like I mentioned at the very beginning, it's something that also happens within your surroundings and your close family or friendships that you have, that there's this kind of just that moment where you become a curator, and usually in those moments you kind of like, you know, you either see the reaction to what you've done and you sort of start enjoying being a curator, or like exploring and you know, or you're not. I don't know, like there's people who are more passive, some people are more active, and I think it's something that you don't necessarily know that you're a curator. You know, you like the others mentioned, sometimes it's just other people see you as a curator, and you then have that sort of, sometimes you have a responsibility, sometimes you don't, because you don't even know you're a curator, you know. It's a tricky one. But the internet, again, is like a mirror that kind of makes it feel like this is something brand new. Like just now when Twitter and Facebook and all these things exist, like we all turn into curators. No, it's not. Like every single day you wake up as a curator, and what you do with it is up to you, really.
Okay, well, thanks for everyone for coming down. I'm sure you had much better things to do, and yet you chose this, so good on you. There are a few people that wanted to ask questions. Feel free to come up to us at the bar and ask them, but obviously not before buying us a drink. We're now going to curate some records over there. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.